background. Kenneth knows who I am. Fred knows who I am. But my name is Kristy Thomas. I have been in the speech world since 1992 when I was a freshman in high school in Kansas City, Missouri. I competed in high school, competed in college. Right after high school, came back and helped to assistant coach on my team that I had graduated from. Undergrad in secondary theater and speech education, MFA in acting, MBA in educational leadership, and I just finished a diversity and inclusion certificate from Cornell University. I started my business, Always Writing for You, in 2013 when I was coaching in Texas. What happened was as a person of color, I recognized that so many of our stories don't get published or recognized until many years later. And it was just the idea of, let's talk about Trayvon Martin the next year. Let's talk about Black Lives Matter today. And so it was the idea of trying to assist in making some of the speech stories that we tell current. And so that was kind of where it started. But I had an African-American student. We couldn't find a piece for him, and ended up being some finalist in Guy at Nationals that year. But the road to get there was it was a lot. And so I started writing. I've been an actress since I was 3, and I felt like the best storytellers have been on stage, and they understand the art of telling a story and how story structure works. And that's how I started my business. I've had national finalists, national champions, state champions. I had a state champion in Indiana in 2017 in DI. And it was when Fred called me to tell me that my DI had won in Indiana. I was at the state tournament in Texas, where I had the Texas state champion and the Indiana state champion in DI the same year. So that was just unbelievable. I didn't start the business to win, I guess. I just wanted to help coaches. Prime example, there was a student in California last year. She wants to be an actress, and she's in a wheelchair. And they couldn't find anything that told the story of an actress who is confined to a wheelchair. And so it was really nice to work with her because she was so appreciative of her being able to be an actress in a wheelchair, telling the story of an actress in a wheelchair. So I keep being reminded that I'm doing the right thing for the right reasons. Language is also a barrier. I'm not sure what the demographics of students of color look like in Indiana. But I have clients that are from different countries who can't use books that are written in Spanish. They can't use books that are written in Portuguese. And so I'm telling their stories because they can't get them translated, or an English translation doesn't exist. And so it's like, we want you to tell your story, but only if. And that was really difficult for me. It's like, oh, well, I'm lucky enough to be an African-American person where there are a substantial amount of books out there and scripts out there that we can use. But it's like, I think about other people who don't have that opportunity. So to tell a student, I know you want to tell a story that deals with, being a refugee from Uganda, but unfortunately, we can't find any books on that. And so it's a punch to the gut to be a part of an activity that creates a struggle like that. So that was what my business was. But today, so original performance. I'm gonna go through some things. I definitely have time at the end. I want to answer any questions. I've never coached this event. I've coached in Missouri, Kansas, Texas, and California, and that event doesn't exist. I didn't coach in California. I lived in California, but that event didn't exist in the states that I coached in. But I've seen it before. This is where I'm coming from with this session, which is why I wanted to do it. And I'm so glad that Fred reached out. I feel like what makes this event a win for the kids is that you are giving them a voice. You're giving them their exact voice. That's the win. You are telling your students that you matter, the stories that you want to tell matter. You may not be able to relate to them, you may not understand them, but a student is coming up with an idea that is genuine for them. I think where the ball drop happens is that students think that they know how to tell a story, and they really don't. And so what I feel like happens is, at least in the OP rounds that I've seen, it just kind of turns into a free-for-all, just in the sense of, it's like, you want to do a DI about aliens? That's what's on your heart? Great. And with no direction, they write this piece about aliens. And they don't understand what it actually means to tell a story. Like, if you, as coaches, what I'm going to suggest is that we work a little bit harder on the front end so that we can work less on the back end. And that's not to say that you're not doing that right now. You may be doing that, but if you're the only coach, if you're doing speech and you're doing debate, if you were like me and you're doing speech and you're doing theater and you're doing team leadership, so you have, when I was teaching in Kansas, which I resigned from my position, so I'm doing my businesses full time, but I had 5 different preps every day. I was teaching a different class every day. And directing 3 shows each semester and going to competitions on the weekend. And it's like, oh, okay, well, let me just add on one more thing. I totally get it. But if you work harder on the front end, you'll work less on the back end. With this particular event, I think what probably needs to happen, and what I would do, is that I would focus some time on this event. I don't, when I'm coaching, I always go through teaching the events, the times and the ins and outs, showing videos, giving examples, all of that at the beginning of the school year, with like each event getting a week. I would do the same thing with this, and this is how I would formulate it. Whether you're seeing kids every day for 45 minutes or you're on a block schedule where it's every other day and you have them for an hour and a half, the minutes that you see the students should be about the same. So what I would suggest is, when you're teaching original performance, that you address each event when you're teaching it. So am I right that you can do any event? Like, you can do prose, DI, HI, duo. Okay. So let's start with prose. I would have them write. Prose is free form, what I consider to be free form. It's a story. And I would not separate kids I would not let them separate themselves just yet. Kids are going to come in and say, oh, I do DI. So my OP is going to be a DI because DI is what I do. Fantastic. But what you want is, you want to create a whole interp kid, so that even if there's a kid that excels at oratory, that kid can still watch and critique a DI. So even if a kid excels at HI, they can still watch and critique a duo. So that what you start having by teaching OP and teaching HI and teaching DI and teaching duo and teaching oratory and info, whether you separate them or put them together, but what you have is a team full of interp kids across the board. So absolutely, there are students that will excel at one thing and not excel at something else. That's perfectly fine. But the idea, which we'll get into later, is that every student that leaves your program should be able to come back as a coach. That's the work on the front side that will help you save time on the back side. So you start with prose. And what I would do is have them write a synopsis. Usually when kids write a synopsis, it ends up being either too much information, not enough information, or they realize that they have no idea what they want, really. I want to do a piece about aliens. Okay, great, write a synopsis. And they're like, well, it's just about aliens, but it has to be more than that. But them figuring that out rather than them coming to you and saying, hey, I want to talk to you about my OP about aliens, and they're bringing nothing to the table, is time that has been wasted on both ends. So my goal is always to not waste time. I don't have time to waste. I don't want to waste the time of Gary. Stop it. Is that Gary? Oh, I'm sorry. I had to stop and pause because I love me some Gary. Hi, Gary. Ooh, now I'm nervous. Gary and Fred in the same room. Oh goodness. But you don't want to waste time. Most of us don't have time to waste. So you need to start presenting it to your students as hey, we're stepping up speech this year. We're online. We're confronting all of these challenges. So what we are going to start doing is not wasting time. A big part of that, and that's especially with OP, is before they bring their story to you, they've cleared it with someone else on the team who has said, I think that's good enough. Yeah, go talk to coach. Great. But that's how I would start pros, is just have them write a synopsis. It forces them to think outside of the box of a one word, I want to do aliens, or a one sentence, it's a duo with a mom and a daughter and they're fighting. Well, fighting about what? What's the problem? What's the conflict? Because if we don't have conflict, we have no story. And it gets them starting so that when they come to you, they'll be able to pitch it the first time and you say yes, rather than they pitch it to you and you ask 1,000 questions that they haven't even thought about. Force them to think about it before they bring it to you. So when we go to DI, what you would present to them is, in their synopsis, the most important thing is the idea of your synopsis is going to cover the idea and what makes us love their main character or hate them. It is DI. What we are looking for in DI is an emotional connection. Students don't understand. One of the most difficult DIs I've ever written is called something about hate. But it was Robert Shepard, if you know him, he's a big coach in Texas. He had an idea that he wanted to do a DI that was about Hitler, but made us understand why he did the things that he did. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to write. But what your students can't do because they don't understand is, I don't want to watch 10 minutes of me hating you. So that even if you're doing a DI about a white police officer who shot a black kid, right? If that's the story, don't take me there until like 6 minutes. So that for 6 minutes, I think this cop is hilarious. I think he's fair. I think he's funny. And then he goes into the grocery store and his life changes. That's what we're going for. When we watch a movie, if you've ever seen the movie Pay It Forward, we fall in love with this kid. He's doing the right thing, so that when he gets murdered, we cry. Always tell your kids, the goal in a DI is not to make people cry. That's what they think, and that's what they want. But you have zero control over whether or not someone cries. I lost my brother in 2014. When someone does a DI about losing a sibling, I am a mess. Whereas my best friend, whose mother has bone cancer, when someone does a piece about bone cancer or someone does a piece about cancer in general, that is going to affect her. Your students need to understand you can't pick your judges, nor do you know their history. The only thing that you can do is tell the best story possible, period. Now there is, please, if you're taking notes, write this down. Universality is really, really big. So if I'm watching a DI and it specifically deals with a brother and sister and nothing else in their life is a part of it, then you drop the ball. So what needs to happen is, it's the relationship between two people that love each other and have known each other for a really long time. So that as I, the judge, who is an adult, is sitting there, I may not have a brother or a sister, but I have a best friend who I love like a sister, or I have an aunt that I have a relationship with like a mother. So the umbrella of this brother-sister relationship is love. So that it's not, it has to be a brother and a sister. It should never have to be a specific relationship for you to get an emotional connection. But it's the universality that gets missed sometimes.
Hey, Kristy.
Yes,
Yeah, can I just share something real quick on that?
absolutely. Yes, yes, yes.
When we ran Seventh Birthday, when Richard Bowman did that, and he won state with that,
Mm-hmm.
the universality that you're talking about, that's what I loved about that piece, because it didn't matter what color or ethnicity the father was. It was a story about a father whose daughter has been kidnapped and murdered,
Right.
and the father captures the guy who did it,
Mm-hmm.
tortures him, and murders him.
Right.
That's a story that anybody can tell. And
Absolutely.
that's what I loved about that piece when I bought it and read it, and I thought, this is brilliant. Anybody can relate to this.
Right.
We're just telling it from a different perspective.
Right. And that's what you should encourage your kids to do when what they're the story that they're thinking of is such a small microcosm. It's like, oh, I want to do a prose about anime, and it's like adults will know what anime is, but the umbrella should be video games, or the umbrella is like cartoons, and then the story goes from the big down to the small, so that all of us, whether you're playing Pong or you're playing Nintendo, everyone has some level of understanding as far as that's concerned. So that's the big thing. If they want to do DI, they need to figure out the universality, and they need to figure out the love and the hate and what that emotional connection is going to be. So with duo, the questions are, who are they as individuals? If you're doing a duo, sometimes you have duos where there's one, and it's usually in the humorous duos, there's one main character, and then the second character plays all of these different people. Fair. If it's dramatic, or I love when students reach out to me to write a piece for them, and they're like, I want the perfect mix of drama and comedy because that's what wins. And what I want to say to them, but I'm not their coach, so I don't. What I want to say to them is, the perfect mix of comedy and drama is not what wins. It is the believability of the two people who are telling the story. That's what wins. Because you can always, like, Fred won state with Seventh Birthday. Seventh Birthday was my first national champion on the collegiate level in prose. Seventh Birthday won the first year that I wrote it. What's funny about that is when something is on the national stage in high school or college, people flood and everybody wants to buy it. And the reality of it is, it's not going to win every year for everyone who decides that they're going to do this story just because it won. There are some things, I have written over 450 titles. There are things that I have written that I think are brilliant. And they've never been done. They've never been a champion. They've never made it to finals. And it's because you as coaches know you have to have the right kid to tell the right story at the right time. Oh, Fred, Wave of Destruction was 7th at Nationals when it was in Utah. He was 7th. Fantastic story. But I wrote a duo for a set of twins, a girl and a boy, and they're from India. It will take years probably to get another duo that is an Indian girl and an Indian boy to do that piece. But for them, they were like, performance art like this isn't something that's really highly respected in India. So those stories, they're not writing those stories. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. This is what I love. It's not about how many times can someone buy the same piece. It's like, I want these kids to be able to tell a piece that relates to them, and that's what's important. Who are they as individuals, and who are they together, and what is their conflict? Conflict is important in DI. Conflict is also important in duo. Even if it's a humorous duo, you still have to have conflict. It could be, my dad loves Big Bang Theory, which is crazy because he also loves John Wayne, but that's neither here nor there. But even in an episode of Big Bang Theory, there's some kind of a conflict, even though the conflict is comedic. Kids often do not, and this kind of goes into HI, which is the next thing. Kids don't think that an HI needs conflict. Well, because it's humorous, Miss Kristy, it doesn't matter. Any story, a 30-minute comedy, an hour-long drama, a 2-hour-long movie, Star Wars, Stranger Things. There has to be a conflict no matter what it is. Novels, autobiographies, there is a conflict. Students do not see humorous pieces having conflict. They only have to be funny. Going into HI, what makes this story real? I can coach HI. As a whole, HI is probably my least favorite event because I feel like the coaches are over it and they let kids just go. The problem with that is, a big push for those of you who are in SDA, a big push at NSDA now is like this idea of diversity and inclusion. And now that I've started a second business and I'm dealing with diversity and inclusion, it's like trying to get people to understand that HI characters need to be based on people, period. Even if they're people, even if they're animals, it doesn't matter, right? Because I feel like what started to happen was, here's your HI. So which character is going to be the ghetto Black girl? Which character is going to be the Asian nail technician? Which character is going to be the like Hispanic immigrant that you can barely understand? And I was floored that it happened. But I also was floored because I felt like I was looking around the room and nobody saw this as a problem but me. Real people, that's what it needs to be. And real people have, if you struggle with coaching HI, as some people do, and especially like explaining it to students, I always go to the NSDA videos for every event. I'm very picky about the videos that I show for HI because some of them are exactly what I don't want my kids to do. But I also, and Robert Shepard said this to me, and he says this all the time, coach your kids. Don't coach for a trophy. When I start camps or when I'm coaching, I tell my students, if you're doing this for a trophy, hit the Dollar Tree, and for $1.07, you can get a trophy and you can put whatever on it you want to, and you can tell anybody, you can tell them that you were the state champion and you have a room full of trophies that you bought from the dollar store. If it's about trophies. But it has to be about, at the end of the day, making these kids better people, period. That's what it has to be about. Making them better communicators, making them better actors, making them more tolerant, making them more accepting, having them walk into a room and telling them that it's okay to be different and it's okay to be seen that way. But as coaches who bring in judges, we also need to have that conversation with the people that we hire as our school judges, especially in this virtual world. I worked with NSDA on the, you guys had to watch, if you were at NSDA last year, you watched, or this year, there was a video and like this diversity kind of form, and NSDA sent it to me and I looked it over and they did a really, really good job. And it's like, no, Black students shouldn't see on their ballot another slavery story. Are we still talking about Martin Luther King? Yes, we are. It's like, we're also still talking about AIDS, and we're still talking about cancer, and we're still talking about children dying of drunk driving. Like, all of these stories are valid, and one should not be less valid than another one because one specifically deals with race or something that happened to a specific group of people. The other side to that is, if you have a student of color that does not want to do a piece about being a student of color, respect it. The thing is, which is what I tell my students of color, at the end of the day, if you do a piece about cancer, you're still the Black kid doing a piece about cancer. You cannot remove race from your performance because it is what you are and what you present before, in our virtual world, before the judge even presses play on your video, your face is there. And I understand, as a Black queer woman, I understand the idea that I don't want to be judged based on my race. But you can't, and as if you are a coach and you're coaching students of color and you are not a coach of color, because I'm doing this work full time right now, I understand how difficult it is to talk about race. I understand how difficult it is. However, please don't avoid it. Don't avoid it. And the worst thing you can do is ignore that it is happening. If it is happening to your students from a coach at another school, you need to deal with it. If it is happening to your students from students at another school, you need to deal with it. And if it's happening on your own team and you turn a blind eye, that love each and every one of you, that is a shame on you, and you have got to address it. We are spiraling down a black hole, and every little piece that every one of us can do to make a difference matters. And if you are a white coach and you are teaching students of color and you're like, I don't know what to say, because I feel like if I say something, I'm going to be offensive. Fred is on this call. Gary's on this call. You can email me at any point in time. The worst thing you can do is nothing. We will give you the words to help you, to help your kids. Because the people that they become, that process has already started by the time they walk in as freshmen in high school. It's already started. But we still have the ability as their high school coaches who spend a ton of time with them in class, at tournaments, coaching them, all of that stuff matters. I still, to this day, there are very few teachers do I still talk to. I still talk to my high school coach. My college coach passed away last year, and unfortunately, his funeral was 3 hours away, but his wife called me because she wanted me to speak at his funeral. Like, we matter more than what we think we do. Sometimes we don't think that we matter at all, and it's not until 5-10 years after a student has graduated, a student that you didn't have a good relationship with, that you didn't even know that they cared about you, and then they send you an invitation to their wedding, and you're like, what? You won't get that thank you until they've experienced a little bit of life and they've grown up a bit. Okay, so proper storytelling. Some of you might be theater teachers, but most speech coaches are not. So for me, OP needs coaches teaching their students what it means to tell a proper story. This is, I'm not even kidding you. Please write down dramatic structure. Dramatic structure is the most important thing for you to know as a coach for prose, DI, duo, oratory, prose, all of the acting events. Very important. I'm going to come back to poetry on what you can do in class. But I want to address plot structure and dramatic structure because poetry is really not a part of it. And this is also with POI. For those of you who fear POI, that's okay. That's all right. POI is super time consuming, but for me as a coach, it is the NSDA version of OP. But the difference is that you can't, like, if we could just stop allowing our students to be lazy, they would be able to change the world. POI is a hard event. It is a very time-consuming event. It is an event that requires them to do research, and it requires them to make an argument. And what's crazy is because of the acting part of it, debaters don't do it. Yet it's an event that debaters would probably be better at because they're used to doing the research aspect of it, and the speech kids aren't. I don't know how you guys assign pieces on my team. I never had more than 8 students on my team. So I would give them all of their pieces. I would mail them to them in the summer. In Texas, you can, most tournaments, you can do 6 events at every tournament. And so we wrote oratories the summer or in May before school got out. And then I would mail them all of their pieces. Here's your duo, here's your DI, here's your HI, and you can't compete. How long do those tournaments last? Who said that? Oh, so Texas, I don't know if you guys are doing swing tournaments. Do you do swing tournaments? Do you know what swing tournaments are? Okay, so in Texas, because Texas is so massive and there's 5 regions and the Texas Constitution says you can only have 2 competitions each weekend. So they started doing swing tournaments, which means that Gary and I are hosting 2 tournaments on the same day in the same building. So his 8 o'clock round is his flight A is at 8. My flight A is at 9. His flight B is at 10. My flight B is at 11. His semis are at 12:30. I mean, and it runs, and the kids know if you don't make it to the round, you don't make it to the round. But it's on a crazy schedule because it's like Texas, you qualify for state by getting a certain amount of points by the deadline. And it's really, the Texas State tournament is almost as close, it's pretty close to being as big as nationals. It's kind of crazy. But it was like, if we do a swing, then that means we could do 4 tournaments in one weekend rather than just doing 2. So that's how the tournament got even bigger, but it gives more opportunities to kids. So in 335 BC, Aristotle wrote the Poetics. If you've never read Aristotle's Poetics, you should. You should read Aristotle's Poetics because it was the origin of dramatic structure. In 335 BC, Aristotle's Poetics cover 6 areas: plot, character, thought, diction, song, and spectacle. In 335 BC, he conceptualized this. Now, as we moved forward and people started to write more, dramatic structure was created, the technical name dramatic structure. That was created in 1863, which is what I, as a theater teacher, or a speech coach, use to explain to students when you're cutting a book down to a DI. This is the formula that you have to follow. So what dramatic structure says is that there are 5 main areas: the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. Those are the 5 areas. What students need to know, and if you've never read Aristotle's Poetics or you've never looked at dramatic structure, when you type in dramatic structure into Google, it'll give you a graph, and it looks like a line, and then it hits a high point, and it comes down, and a line. I always say it was my first roller coaster. That's exactly what it was. It shot up, and then it shot down, and then that neck pop happened, and it was over. But one thing that and that's, those are the basics. You'll have dramatic structures that will add in other things. The one thing that I always talk about is the inciting incident, and that would come in between exposition and rising action. So I'm married. Exposition is the who, what, when, where, and why. Who are these people? What is their relationship to each other? What's happening in this story? When are we in time? Is this 1800s? Is this 1963? Are we in Mississippi? Are we in Beirut? It gives us all of the basic information. Teaching dramatic structure to your students for the first time will blow their mind. But what will make it easier is if you, like kids watch TV. So if you explain dramatic structure to them and then you watch the pilot, it has to be the first episode of any television show. If you watch the pilot episode of Big Bang Theory, we meet these people for the first time. We are introduced to them, to their relationships with each other, to where they work, to where they live. Those are all of the basics that have to happen. So when your students are writing duos and it's a brother-sister, just having a guy and a girl does not make them brother-sister. It could make them cousins. It could make them best friends. They could be brother-sister. They could be twins, which is a different brother-sister relationship. Big brother, little brother. The exposition is giving us that basic information, and it probably needs to happen in the teaser or shortly after. The inciting incident is the thing that happens that turns the world upside down. So that if Kenneth and I are married, we have 5 kids, the scene opens, kids, come on, hurry up. Kids come down, breakfast, grab their lunches, they're off to school. Kenneth comes down, I give his lunch, he looks sad, I don't know why, he tells me he has cancer. Inciting incident, everything was fine until that moment that he told me he had cancer. The entire world has been turned upside down. So the reason that I always teach inciting incident in my plot diagram or dramatic structure, you'll hear it. I mean, it's the same thing, but you'll hear both of them. But the reason that I teach it is because sometimes that gets lost. And what ends up happening in OP is that students will just tell a story and then they'll get to the climax when they never really had an inciting incident. Something else that students do, and I don't know why they think that this is clever, is I'm gonna keep it a secret. And it's like, no, it can't be a secret. That's not it's not actually how proper storytelling works. We can't keep secrets because it's not going, when kids are cutting pieces or they're writing their OPs or they're working on POI, always tell them, you don't need it if it is not something, quote me on this, without which the story cannot be told. Do Kenneth and I need kids? No. Does it up the stakes if we have kids? Yes. There is a different relationship between Kenneth and I just got married and we're newlyweds and he has cancer. And Kenneth and I have been married for 10 years. We have 3 kids. One of them is a child with a disability and he has cancer. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's like when kids come to you with a story for their OP, I always say, they're going to come to you with their 100%, which is usually my 60%. Teach them what it means to up the stakes. Up the stakes just simply means you have your dramatic story, and I want you to make it stronger. I want you to make it better. I want you to make it more emotionally inclined. I want you to give it more of a universality, but that's what raising the stakes means. Always a problem because that inciting incident. Yeah, I agree, Gary. So once you've taught them dramatic structure, this is what I do when I'm teaching dramatic structure, find a short play. If you don't have, like, oh my God, everybody, I feel like you are not a speech coach if you do not have Telephone Man sitting on your shelf. So Telephone Man is by Chris Crutcher. Chris Crutcher, that's it. It is in a short story. It's in a book that's it's a collection of short stories. That's what he writes, and he writes them well. And if you don't have it, get it. There are so many, like Gone Fishing is one of my favorite stories. I love it. There's so many great short stories in there. But what I do, I teach dramatic structure or plot diagramming. It's all the same. I teach it. And then we watch an episode of a television show. And as we're watching, I pause and I'm like, we have the exposition now. They're filling out a worksheet. So they're looking for the exposition. They're listening for it. Pause. Inciting incident. Did we get it? What was it? Great. So now they're getting it. Then we go into the rising action. The rising action is anything that takes us from the inciting incident to the climax. So there's a ton of things that could happen in the rising action. The climax, by definition, is the highest emotional point in a story. I often fight with children who are like, my climax is in the teaser. No, it's not. Like, you may put it in the teaser and you'd be wrong. And their answer is, because I want to just hit them with it. I just want to punch them. And I'm like, but in the teaser, no one knows who you are. You haven't told us enough of the story for us to care. So if you give us the climax in the intro, no one who's judging you is going to know that it's the climax because we don't know the story yet. So explain it to them so that they understand, if you give me the climax in the teaser, you've missed all of these other important parts that make me care when the climax happens. And they'll also want to do this, like if you've ever seen the movie Crash, where it's like, we all these people and they're related and we don't know how. And that great idea. You have 10 minutes. So it's like, I know you want to be creative and it's all in your head and it's going to be fantastic, but you have 10 minutes to tell this story. And sometimes what they want to tell is a short story that needs to be 20, 25 minutes. And it's difficult for them to understand. You just can't do all of that in a 10-minute, 9:30 with an intro story. But I'm not like authoritarian, but at some point you just have to say, we're not doing that. We're not. Either you're going to follow the instructions Or it's like writing an English essay. You can't move the third paragraph to the first paragraph because it's stronger if it doesn't make sense. You can't have the conclusion at the beginning because you think that it's better. It doesn't work like that. And if you are a coach that doesn't have that authority, change, get it, because students will take that experience in OP and then they'll come to you with a DI that you are 100% against, that you don't want them to run. You don't think that it's not appropriate for whatever reason. It's not appropriate. I had a coach call me once. It's probably maybe 3 weeks ago. It was right when I announced on Facebook that I was starting to do diversity and inclusion stuff. And he had a white student who wanted to do a piece that was written by for a Black person, and it was a fight. And I was like, but it's not a fight. Like, if you want to work on that piece, okay, I'm not going to enter you in any tournaments, because for that coach, we're not doing that. And that was a conversation that they needed some support in, like, how do I have this conversation? I was like, well, you talk to the student. On my team, we would have one conversation one time. They would understand. We would hug it out and keep it pushing. But if you give your students kind of a free-for-all, if that's how you run your team, it will be difficult for you to pull back authority. But to that, I say, start now so that you can have that authority. There was a girl that I did camp with in a state that I won't mention, but she was doing a POI about, it was about consent. That was not what she thought it was about, but when you watched it, you're like, oh, this is about consent. But she had she was saying things that I would never, and she's like, no, I want to make people uncomfortable. And I'm like, but your goal is to tell the story. Students often live in the shock value storytelling world. And some coaches allow them to do that. And we just can't, we just can't do that. But then I remember when Nationals was in Kansas City, I sat with my oratory girl watching finals of HI. And someone that I have been friends with for forever, we have a really good relationship. His kid was in finals of HI, and his intro was he was doing 008, and he said, for Halloween, I dressed up as 007. I got a lot of candy and a lot of ass. I wouldn't have a job on Monday morning if my principal or superintendent saw that. And what was funny was, my kid looked at me and I was just like, oh, Jesus, I can't believe that happened. But when I talked to her about it, there were a couple of realities that came up. He went through 13 rounds. He went through 12 rounds and made it to finals doing that intro, being judged by adults from all over this country that thought that that was okay. And then you say, well, I guess he deserves to be here. I was disgusted for 10 minutes. But things like that, and I know the coach knew, and it was like when they got back from nationals, the superintendent was like, the board wants to watch your student, wants to watch the nationals video. And he was like, it'd be better if we just come perform in person. And that's what he did. But that's forever. That is archived. That is one click away. And that's what happens when you give kids, in my opinion, you give kids too much power. And I understand that there is a level of trust, but the trust comes in because you've taught them what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And if you have even an inkling that this might be something that would be deemed unacceptable by me, by the principal, by admin, by the district, then come and talk to me. I did a duo once. It was a mixed girl and a Black guy, and it was all about her wanting to get that piece of her out. And I'm in really rich, really white, really suburban Mansfield. And I gave the script to my principal and I let her watch the kids before we went to competition. And she said, I think if you think that this is okay, I think that this is okay. And that's what you have to do sometimes. So it's not to say, don't push the envelope. But just be sure that a lot of school districts have a I don't exactly know what it's called, but it's like a clause for a community clause, and it's like you have to represent us well. So when you teach them dramatic structure, find a short story, make copies, give everybody a copy of the story, give them time, let them read it, let them answer all of the questions. So now you've taught them, they've done the TV show that you did with them, and now they did this. Prose is the easiest, and now they did this prose by themselves. So now in the course of teaching dramatic structure, they've had 3 contacts with it, so they should get it. It shouldn't be something that you teach and walk away from. It should be something that you teach and then it becomes a part of your culture. So the other thing is, in order to coach your kids to be coaches, you have to coach in front of them. So coach a duo with the whole class watching. The kids don't get to speak. They're just watching you point out the things that are working, point out the things that aren't working. You can ask them for feedback, but the goal is for them to learn the language of this activity so that they can start using it amongst themselves. So coach a poetry, coach a prose, coach a DI, coach a duo. It's the easiest when you pick your top kids. They love performing and they love being an example. So give them that opportunity. Just do that so that they can then start using the lingo. Have them write down the things, like keywords or key phrases that you say. Have them write that down so that they can start using it. The climax, sometimes kids will ask when the climax lives. If it's a 10-minute long piece, the climax should live around 6:37, and that's the start. So if your climax starts at 6:37, then the climax should end about 8. So that gives you another 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes to come off of the climax. And then a really important part, sometimes kids will think the climax is one sentence. Like it's this one sentence that says, I killed him. But the climax for me is more encompassing than that. The climax starts with a build that gets us to that sentence. And even when we get to that sentence, you can still have some more after it. Really quick about coaching climaxes. If you're taking notes, please write this down and share it with your children. Screaming does not equal drama. I am that coach. I don't have to raise my voice. I just look at you like you crazy. And the kids know, she mad, y'all. Like, y'all better stop talking. She got the face. Like, I don't have to raise my voice, and neither should you. Kids need to understand that the 2 things that we do not utilize in dramatic storytelling are silence and emotion, that we acting through the silence. Silence is not just silence. Acting through the silence is a game changer. Because if I say, Gary, I hate you! I hate you! And I scream at Gary, I hate him. Cool. But what's more interesting, it's like you make a choice, but I want you to make a better choice because Gary, I hate you. And it's more because as people, we see screaming on television and we think that that's real. And there are some households where parents scream at each other. My parents have been married for 44 years. I've never heard them raise their voices to each other, but the looks, whoo, them looks, I'm like, ooh, I need to get my purse and grab my pearls and go. Clearly, y'all need to have a conversation that I do not need to be present for. But challenge your students to find another way. I used my first national finalist, 2013, 2014. He was doing Soul, the Gregory Hines DI, where he was tap dancing. His climax was him not speaking, just tap dancing with a ridiculous amount of emotion, for 30 to 45 seconds. He didn't say a word. He put it all in that. So and it was so creative. There are other ways. My most recent DI finalist that was doing the hanging tree, her climax was her walking with her dead son, and just her walking, son, looking at all of the people watching her. You saw her see those people and what that did to her. I was done. And the crazy part is that was not the climax that I wrote. I tell kids all the time, find the climax and don't touch it. Like you do not mess with the climax. I ate my words that day at nationals. And she apologized. She was like, okay, Miss Kristy. So I'd never met this girl before. And she came to me and was like, I cut out the climax. Hello. She cut out the climax. She's like, but my coach and I, we think that it's really good. And it was that element of silence. And if you watch it, what you hear are her shoes on the floor. And it is just, I was done. I was like, brilliant. And those moments will happen. Those moments will absolutely happen. But there are special kids who are able to find those moments. And I always tell my students, instead of telling them no, I will tell them to prove me wrong. That gives them an opportunity. You want to do something that I disagree with? Prove me wrong. But once I make a decision after you think you have proven me wrong, then it is what I say it is. But it gives them more ownership again. Questions about like all of that and other stuff. Any questions?
Yeah, Kristy, I have a question. I turned my camera off because I've taken a shower and I haven't dried my hair yet.
That's okay. That's all right.
So I've been in rounds and I've had students who also want to do this with their OPs. They want to tell their story and they want everybody to know it's their story.
Okay.
And I know sometimes as a judge, that's made me feel really uncomfortable because how do you put somebody sixth when they're telling the story of their mother's death?
Right.
So how do you get kids to tell their story, but try not to make it as personal, I guess?
So when students reach out to me and say, I want to tell my story, the first thing that I tell them, because mental health is real, it is real, and it's even more real now than it was before. And what you as coaches have got to realize is that when a student is word for word, event for event, moment for moment, when they are telling their story, they will never accept a critique, ever. Because you are telling them the way that you expressed your mother dying of breast cancer was wrong, or let's change it, or it wasn't dramatic enough. And for them, it is a personal attack beyond any personal attack they have ever experienced. I tell them when I get those emails, speech is not therapy. It is not. And I explain to them, you will never be able to take an honest critique. And quite honestly, your coach will probably never give you one. But what's going to kill them is that when they go to competitions and someone who's not their coach, someone who does not love them, someone who is thinking, I'm just going to write an honest ballot and hopefully this will make their performance better, is going to write them something that they are not going to be able to handle, and it is going to crush their spirit. So what I do, Kim, is I say, oh, you want me to write a DI about, I tell them, give me the most important bullet points, and I only allow them 3. I'm gay, coming out to my mother who disapproves, give it 4 and kicks me out of the house. Great. I'm going to write a 10-minute piece that has those 4 points, and I guarantee you, I don't even want to hear their story because I'm not going to write that. I'm just going to write gay, came out to mom disapproved, kicked out the house. That's it. So what I would do is tell them, if you want to tell the story as the umbrella, that's fine. But you cannot tell your story. You cannot. I feel like kids are way too unstable right now, or they're selling being stable and they're really not. And I don't want to be on the receiving end of little Timmy did a DI that Kristy Thomas wrote for him, and it was everything that happened to him when he was molested by his father. Like, don't want any piece of that. And it really goes to, I think the big thing that kids recognize when I mention it to them is you would never be able to take a critique about this. And when my brother died in 2014, and I can say that to you now, but I could never write about it. And I'm an adult, and it's 6 years later, and I still couldn't write about my brother dying. And so for them as teenagers, they have experienced something that they think is story worthy. They don't realize in any way, shape, or form that they're setting themselves up to be judged. And what happens when they go straight sixes every week? You know what I mean? Like that's the big thing, is if everyone's writing their story, someone is going to get last. Someone's story is going to be seen as not as good as another story. And then that student, who gets the one is on their team, and for them, the story isn't as good. Well, it's never going to be as good because it's your story. So that's what I would say. I would say, hey, we can address it. Like, you can tell a story about being, molested as a child, but you're not telling your story. You cannot tell your story. And if you don't, and what's hard is that you probably don't know their story. And then you don't know if it's their story or not. So I would just try to avoid it as much as you can. So, really quick before you guys leave. So I created a discount code for my website. You're not going to see it, because it's just for you guys. Feel free to pass it on. Fred left, but I'll send it to him thank you, Ronnie. I'll send it to him so that he can post it for all of the Indiana coaches to see. But it's all caps IHSFA 20, and it's 25% off your whole order, whatever that is. So if you've never seen anything that I've written, everything is separated into categories. And also, I don't know how to get this out there, but I'll tell you guys and make it a point to let Fred know. So I get a lot of coaches that email me and say, hey, this piece is about a woman who has cancer and how that's affecting her life. Could this character be changed to male? Most of the time, I don't care. Coaches will email me because their states and nationals require that you stay gender specific, which in 2020 with gender identity having, being such a high topic, I'm like, the fact that we're still that conversation has to happen is crazy. But if you ever see a synopsis that's male or female, but in your mind you're like, this doesn't really have to be a guy, this doesn't really have to be a girl, just email me. I'll always give permission. And if I don't give permission, I will tell you why I'm not giving permission. But I just know that's at the end of the day, I just want people to tell good stories and have a good time doing it and learn something. That's all I want. So stuff like that just doesn't matter to me.
Kristy, can you repeat the code again?
Yeah.
And then Ronnie asked, he said, how long will that be, the discount?
Oh, yes. Okay, so the code is all caps IHSFA. Is that right? That's y'all, right? Okay. Okay.
Yes, that's close to Illinois, but yes.
So it's IHSFA 20. And that's in all caps. And that is from today until the 20th. And if by chance, which I'll send this to Fred as well, if by chance you don't have a school credit card and you need to do a PO, you can just send me your order. I'll create the invoice with the 25%, send it back to you. I get working with schools. That's perfectly fine. So don't feel like it's going to run out. And if your school hasn't started yet, or maybe you don't have access to funds until, some schools don't have access to funds until October in some states, If it's October and you did not have an opportunity to participate in the sale, just email me. I'll turn the code back on for 24 hours so that you can use it, and then we can move forward. If you come up with anything else, my website is alwayswriting4u.com. I live my life sitting in front of a computer watching reruns of Judge Judy and writing. So that's what I do. But if you need anything else, I saw things come up in the chat, but I wasn't really reading them. If you put something in the chat that you want to talk to me about, email me and we can start that dialogue. And if you're having, again, any issues with diversity and inclusion on your team, if anything, you are not in this alone, and there's no reason for you to feel overwhelmed. Jessica, I hope you're still there. You're going to be fine, Jessica. You're going to be fine. It's your first year. Congratulations. She awake. She might not be awake. Okay, thank you guys. Take care. Gary, it was good to see you, babe. Bye.